You have been told your entire life to trust your gut. It is a comforting piece of advice, usually handed down by people who have never had anything worth stealing. Here is what actually happens. You sit across from a guy at a bar or a boardroom table. He looks you in the eye. He buys the second round. He listens to your frustrations, nods at exactly the right moments, and his tone is perfectly calibrated to make you feel understood. Your brain quietly stamps a seal of approval on his forehead. You vouch for him. You bring him into your business, your inner circle, your life. 6 months later, the exact second a promotion, a payout, or a sliver of status is on the line, he guts you without hesitating. He takes the credit, he takes the money, or he walks away with the contacts you built. And you are left staring at the wreckage, wondering how your instincts failed you so completely. The brutal truth is that you didn't misread him. You just brought a biological compass to a game of chess. Mainstream psychology and feel-good self-help speakers worship intuition as if it were a mystical lie detector. They tell you that your body always knows, but your body does not know. Your body is running legacy software designed to keep primitive tribes from tearing each other apart in the dark. We are biologically wired to default to trust because a species that constantly suspects its own members cannot cooperate, hunt, or sleep. The feeling of safety you get when someone smiles, mirrors your posture, or uses your first name isn't insight. It is neurochemistry. It is an oxytocin dump designed to grease the wheels of social cohesion. Your internal alarm system isn't calibrated for modern power dynamics. It is calibrated to look for physical violence. If the person across from you isn't holding a weapon or shouting, your primitive brain automatically assumes they belong to the tribe. This is exactly why highly intelligent people, the ones who actually hold on to their leverage and protect their peace, eventually stop trusting their gut. They realize that relying on intuition is simply rewarding people who are excellent at simulating empathy. We are conditioned by movies and morality tales to expect predators to look like predators. We expect the threat to sneer, to act cold, to be obviously selfish. But in the real world, the most dangerous players in your life wear the camouflage of a good guy. They are agreeable. They are helpful. They know exactly how to trigger your biological pacifiers. When you base your alliances on who makes you feel comfortable, you are handing the keys to your life over to whoever has the most practice faking sincerity. You are watching this because you have been burned and you are tired of being the collateral damage in someone else's game. You thought your instincts were sharp. You pride yourself on being a man who can read a room. But reading a room only tells you who is socially calibrated, not who is loyal. You allowed the pleasant temperature of a relationship to dictate your strategic decisions. This is the first law you must internalize if you want to stop being prey. Warmth is weather, but incentives are gravity. A sunny disposition can change into a hurricane in a single afternoon. Gravity pulls a man in the exact same direction, predictably, every single time. Your gut only measures the weather. It tells you nothing about the gravity of the situation that will unfold the moment resources become scarce. Intelligent people look at the board, not the smile. They understand that the gut is a liability. They refuse to grant trust simply because a social interaction went smoothly. They see the physiological reaction of comfort for exactly what it is, a blindfold. But realizing your internal alarm system is broken is only the first step. To understand why you were blindsided, you have to look at the lie itself and the terrifying reality that the person deceiving you didn't even know they were doing it. To understand why you were blindsided, you have to look at the lie itself and the terrifying reality that the person deceiving you didn't even know they were doing it. We are conditioned by movies and morality tales to picture liars as calculating villains plotting in the shadows. We think of manipulation as a highly conscious, deliberate strategy where someone actively decides to ruin us and laughs about it behind closed doors. But human psychology is much darker and much more efficient than a theatrical script. The most destructive people in your life do not view themselves as villains. In their own minds, they are the hero, the victim, or the misunderstood genius. Think about the ex-business partner who quietly siphoned clients away from your joint venture, or the co-worker who stood up in a meeting and claimed credit for 6 months of your grinding labor. Think about a former lover who crossed an unforgivable boundary and then detonated the entire relationship to cover their tracks. When they tell the story of the fallout to their friends, to their new partner, or even to a judge in a courtroom, they do not sweat. Their voice does not shake. They do not break eye contact. They easily pass every single informal lie detector test you try to run on them. Why? Because by the time the words leave their mouth, their ego has completely rewritten the history of the event. They genuinely remember themselves as the wronged party. They have convinced themselves that you forced their hand, that you were unappreciative, or that they were simply taking back what the universe rightfully owed them. The primary function of the human mind is not to record objective truth. Its primary function is to protect the ego. If someone had to walk around actively holding the conscious thought that they are a thief, a cheat, or a parasite, their self-image would collapse under the weight of the shame. So, the brain runs a brilliant, silent defense mechanism. It alters the memory. It smooths over the ugly edges. It justifies the betrayal as an act of righteous survival. They do not lie to you. They lie to themselves first, and you are just downstream of the delusion. You are dealing with an innocent predator, a person who will destroy your livelihood with a clear conscience. This is exactly why your instincts failed you when you tried to evaluate them. You were looking for the physiological signs of deception. You wanted the nervous tick, the stutter, the gaze dropping to the floor. But those are the hallmarks of an amateur. Those are the leaks of a person who still possesses a conscience and feels the weight of guilt. The most lethal players in the game do not feel guilt because, to them, there is no performance. They are telling you their truth. This brings us to a cold, undeniable law of human nature. Sincerity is not evidence of reality. It is simply evidence that their ego has successfully rationalized their behavior. You have likely wasted years of your life arguing with these people. You have brought out text messages, forwarded old emails, and constructed airtight logical timelines, trying to force them to admit what they did. You thought you could break through their lie with concrete facts and corner them into accountability, but you cannot negotiate with a self-induced delusion. You are demanding an apology from someone who has literally erased the crime from their own mental hard drive. Highly intelligent people do not try to extract confessions. They do not care whether the person across from them means well or believes their own garbage. They judge the action, they judge the outcome, and they completely ignore the emotional conviction with which the lie is delivered. When you stop being blinded by how sincere someone seems, the entire board changes. You stop looking for malicious intent and start looking at the mechanics of the game being played against you. You realize that intent is irrelevant if the knife still ends up in your back. But once you accept that sincerity is just a performance they put on for themselves, you're forced into a much darker realization about exactly where the real danger is standing. Once you accept that sincerity is just a performance they put on for themselves, you are forced into a much darker realization about exactly where the real danger is standing. It is almost never the loud competitor across the street, the open rival, or the stranger plotting against you from a distance. Those people are easy to manage because they are outside the gates. You already have your shields up when you face them. The true architect of your ruin is almost always someone who shares your table, someone who has access to your passwords, your vulnerabilities, and your private calendar. Strangers cannot destroy your life because they lack the necessary coordinates. The threat you face is always mathematically proportional to the amount of access you have granted. You are never destroyed by your enemies. You are destroyed by the people you allowed to stand close enough to see where the armor is thin. Look at how modern power plays out in the workplace or high-level industries. A CEO is rarely ousted by a rival corporation. He is forced out by the trusted board member who flew on his private jet, listened to his insecurities, and quietly aggregated the voting blocks behind his back while he was distracted. A man doesn't lose his business to a hostile takeover. He loses it to the co-founder who knew exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit because he helped build the company. We guard the front door with cameras and alarms, yet we hand the keys to the vault to anyone who makes us feel less lonely for a weekend. Closeness creates a blind spot, and in the architecture of control, a blind spot is the only space where a lethal blow can be struck. This brings us to the sharpest point of the blade, the truth that most men spend their entire lives running away from. If you have been repeatedly blindsided, used, or left holding the wreckage of a broken alliance, it is not because you are cursed, it is not because the world is uniquely cruel, and it is certainly not because you are just too good for this cynical society. The issue isn't bad luck. The issue is the signals you broadcast and the incentives you create. When you give someone unconditional trust, you aren't showing them love. You are removing the tax on their bad behavior. You are stripping away the fear of consequences, which is the only mechanism that keeps human nature cooperative. By making yourself completely transparent, you present an economic opportunity that is simply too profitable for their self-interest to pass up. You gave them the map to your insecurities, the key to your leverage, and the guaranteed promise that you wouldn't be watching. You practically invited the betrayal by making it cost-free. This realization should sting, but it should also clarify the entire board. You have been treating trust as a moral currency, an emotional gift you hand out to prove your own decency. The people around you, however, are reading that gift as weakness. They see a man who wants to be liked so badly that he is willing to overlook red flags, smooth over inconsistencies, and leave his flanks completely unguarded. You created the exact environment where treason became the most logical move for them to make. Power dynamics do not respect your sentimentality. They only respect structure. If you leave the vault open, you cannot blame the gravity of greed for pulling someone inside. You must realize that protecting yourself is your operational responsibility, not theirs. Expecting someone to pass up an easy opportunity to advance at your expense just because you were nice to them is a child's strategy. This is the exact moment where the average person surrenders to bitterness and builds a wall, but the highly intelligent do something entirely different. This is the exact moment where the average person surrenders to bitterness and builds a wall, but the highly intelligent do something entirely different. They do not isolate themselves in a fortress of paranoia. Instead, they build a filter. When you construct a wall, you are reacting strictly out of trauma. You are deciding that the world is entirely hostile and that the only way to survive is to sever all connections and trust absolutely no one. A wall keeps the predators out, but it also starves you of the leverage, the alliances, and the opportunities that are necessary to accumulate actual power. A wall is a monument to your fear. A filter, on the other hand, is a mechanism of absolute control. The intelligent man lets the world flow toward him. He opens the door, he smiles, he shakes hands, and he makes the person across from him feel entirely welcome, but he quietly suspends his judgment. He replaces the biological default setting of instant trust with a slow drip verification process. To understand how this operates in reality, look at the tactics of a seasoned executive or a sharp political operator when they are assessing a new ally. They never hand over the actual keys to the kingdom. Instead, they run a controlled experiment. They will intentionally drop a manufactured piece of low-level gossip, a minor fabricated vulnerability, or a false timeline into a casual conversation over drinks. It feels intimate, like a genuine bonding moment, but it is entirely engineered. Then they sit back and simply watch the network. If that specific piece of information surfaces somewhere else a week later, the test is over. The cost of the leak was zero because the vulnerability was fake, but the value of the intelligence gained is infinite. They have perfectly mapped the other person's loyalty and discretion without risking any actual capital. They do not confront the person. They do not act betrayed. They simply recategorize them from a potential ally to a known liability and adjust their access accordingly. This is how you transition from being a passive target to the architect of your own social environment. You stop projecting your own desire for loyalty onto other people, and you start forcing them to demonstrate it over an extended timeline. You stop asking yourself if someone is a good person, which is a meaningless, subjective metric, and you start observing how they navigate small temptations. You watch what a man does when lying would cost him absolutely nothing. You observe how a potential partner treats people who offer them no immediate leverage or benefit. You track the minute inconsistencies between the story they tell you in January and the version they repeat in June. You must always remember the core law of this game. Warmth is weather, but incentives are gravity. A sharp operator does not care if the weather is pleasant today. He does not care if the conversation flows easily or if the shared laughs feel genuine. He is looking underneath the social performance to see what gravitational forces are pulling on the person across the table. He is analyzing their debts, their ambitions, their insecurities, and their hidden resentments. He prices his trust so incredibly high that only those who are willing to do the grueling work of consistency over years can ever afford it. This level of detachment requires immense discipline. It requires you to sit comfortably with the tension of an open question rather than rushing toward the false comfort of a premature conclusion. Most men cannot stomach this. They are starved for connection. They want to feel secure in their social standing, and so they sell their trust cheaply to the first person who mirrors their complaints and buys them a beer. The intelligent man accepts the cold isolation of the filter because he knows it is the only thing keeping his empire intact. Yet even the finest filter has a fatal flaw, because no matter how deeply someone has proven their loyalty to you, there is one universal law of human nature that can break them overnight. Yet even the finest filter has a fatal flaw, because no matter how deeply someone has proven their loyalty to you, there is one universal law of human nature that can break them overnight. Loyalty is not a permanent character trait. It is merely a temporary alignment of circumstances. Think of the employee who has stood by your side for 10 years, the right-hand man who helped you build the company, or the lifelong friend who has passed every single test your filter ever threw at them. You consider them completely safe. You hand them the combination to the safe and the passwords to the servers because they have earned it. But then, a brutal external pressure is applied. A crippling gambling debt they hid from their spouse, a vicious divorce that threatens to bankrupt them, a secret addiction, or a sudden, massive threat to their own survival. When that invisible vice tightens, the math of their survival fundamentally changes. When they finally break and take what is yours, they do not sell you out because they suddenly hate you. They do not do it because they were secretly a sociopath the entire time. They do it because the external pressure on their life has suddenly eclipsed their affection for you. They hand over your client list, they drain the account, or they leverage your private secrets to save themselves. We desperately want to believe that true loyalty is unbreakable, that an inherently good person will choose their own ruin over betraying a friend. But in the theater of power, trusting in someone's core moral goodness is a catastrophic strategic error. You're assuming that their affection for you has repealed the laws of human nature. It hasn't. It has just hidden them beneath a decade of convenient peace. Everyone has a price, and acknowledging this isn't toxic cynicism, it is the foundation of ultimate safety. The highly intelligent do not get angry at this reality. They simply factor it into the equation. They stop demanding blind, cinematic loyalty and start managing environments and leverage. They ensure that their inner circle is never placed in a position where betraying them is the most logical way out of a crisis. They compartmentalize their risks. The average man feels guilty withholding absolute access from a loyal friend, believing that true friendship requires total transparency. The Machiavellian mind knows that withholding access is exactly what preserves the friendship. By keeping your leverage guarded, you remove the catastrophic temptation that would eventually force them to choose between your survival and theirs. When you accept this, the anxiety of potential betrayal vanishes. You stop walking into rooms wondering if the people around you are secretly bad. You look at them with cold, clear eyes, understanding that they are simply human, bound by the same biological imperatives and incentives as anyone else. You no longer fear the shadows because you have mapped the structural integrity of the room. You have traded the comforting, fragile illusion of absolute trust for the indestructible armor of leverage and observation. You can love your brother, your partner, or your closest ally completely, while simultaneously ensuring they do not hold the single string that unravels your empire. You are finally playing the game with your eyes wide open. As you step out into the world and begin applying this filter, your reality is going to shift. The people who benefited from your blindness will immediately sense the change in the architecture. Pay close attention to the people in your life who demand your trust the fastest, who get offended when you ask questions. They aren't insulted by your boundaries. They are panicking because you just closed their favorite blind spot.